Hello.
Hello.
I was just showing a few of the pages for the inside. I just love Colleen's artwork in here. It's so beautiful. But do you want to tell
She
us a little bit about it?
Sure. Colleen is an amazing illustrator. And honestly, the best fact checker I have ever had. Even though it isn't really the illustrator's job to check the facts. But she was so thorough. Um, and also, the whole who invented the fortune cookie is actually a mystery, you know? And the more I dug into it, the more the information I found was contradicting. And so, you know what I mean, I did my best to filter through it, but then the manuscript I sent her, a few of the things I thought it was something, but I hadn't like completely verified it. And then she would, write back and say like, wait, I couldn't find this, or here's something that contradicts it. And then I would be like, oh yeah, shoot, you're right, you know what I mean? And I would dig further, and then I would find the contradictions and then have to wait through. One example was the semi-automated machine. So I have, in the story, the grandmother visits, her friend's father's bakery, and in the basement there's the first semi-automated machine to make the fortune cookies. And from what I initially read, it sounded a little bit like an octopus, with all these arms, but like, or maybe
That
I,
song?
yes, or maybe I imagined it. But then she was like, I can't find a picture, and I'm not sure that's how it looks in the. I dug specifically on that, and I was like, oops, you're right.
Oh,
But I would say the real kicker was that, unbeknownst to either of us, Colleen and I, it was being evaluated by the Smithsonian to sort of co-publish and add to their collection. And the Smithsonian does not, take the, facts and history lightly. And they have all these like, experts that they sent it to. So we didn't know, but they they shot out that manuscript to,
wow.
like subject matter experts like all over the US. And then they ended up saying, yes, we want to, do it together. And then I asked my editor, like, oh, did they find anything that was inaccurate, um and the editor said, they had the same issue with you, which is they found a lot of contradicting information, but they agreed with you and they didn't find anything that they thought that needed to be corrected. And I thought that's a real testament to
That's,
Cohen catching the last details that were a little bit, unverified.
that's
But
amazing. Wow.
I know, I just thought,
So that's what a compliment to have the Smithsonian give their seal of approval to your book.
yeah,
And including there's a lot of back matter here for people who are interested. I mean, this is all about, I think all of us enjoy fortune cookies and don't really think that much about them or where they come from and assume that they're Chinese because we get them from Chinese restaurants. I mean, as I was reading this book, I kept having these moments where I'd be like, "Hey guys, did you know this?" Or wait till you guys find it," because there's just so many little pieces in here that are just so surprising and so interesting to read about. But it's in a very, easy to read format. This is something that kids can pick up and read. It's told in kind of as a story. It's not just a regular nonfiction book that it just lists a bunch of facts. It's told kind of in story format, so it's really easy for kids to just pick up and read along and digest. It's really well done.
I think it actually was inspired by mom. So her Japanese name is Miyako, and she also grew up in San Francisco's Japantown, and honestly, pretty close to the same time when a lot of this happened. And she was located during the war for being Japanese American, and they never went back to San Francisco's Japantown. They went to Los Angeles. And so when I wrote the manuscript, one of my critique partners said, your story is like really boring. It's like Wikipedia. And the only thing I thought was interesting was like your author's note that your mother accepted your dad's proposal from, marriage proposal from a fortune cookie. And she was like, could you put more of your mom in there? And I was like, wait, my mom lived similar to that time and also went to Los Angeles. So it kind of followed the story. And I was like, ding, I think when you have like those aha ding ding moments. And I actually, when I started, like when I first discovered the fortune cookie, like as an invention. I was on a college trip. Like I was visiting colleges for my oldest. We were
Mm,
looking at art school, so that was like maybe like less than 10 years ago. And so my husband booked us a hotel, by Fisherman's Wharf, which I at the time I was like, why do you pick such a touristy area? Like I didn't, because like he's more from Northern California, and so
mm,
we were really close to that Boudin Bakery, which
mm,
my kids went crazy because they have like animal shaped bread, and also the bread's incredible. But like
mm,
upstairs, as I recall, there was an upstairs, and that was all like these exhibits about all the stuff that was invented in San Francisco,
mm,
and the fortune cookies was one of them. So I just assumed it was invented in San Francisco, and so when I sort of sat down to like, oh, that would be an interesting story to write it. And then I looked it up and it was like, wait, there's a lot of controversy. Like I had
right.
no idea. And I didn't even necessarily know that it was an American invention. Like before I actually even saw that exhibit in San Francisco, someone said like, where fortune cookies, created, I would have been like, I don't know, maybe China. Like, I have no
Yeah.
idea. You know what I mean? Like, I would have assumed. But then the interesting twist that I discovered from this research was that the Japanese Americans were running Chinese restaurants during this time because
Mm,
Chinese food was super trendy, like egg foo young and chop suey. And, and now it's like the reverse, like in my town,
mm,
that all the sushi restaurants are run by Chinese Americans because
wow.
sushi and raw fish are really trendy now. So
Right.
the whole thing was so interesting to me because I'm half Chinese and half Japanese. It's like
Perfect blend. Yeah.
well, possibly you do what you have to do when you're an immigrant and you're really limited to earn a living. Like, you
Right.
kind of the businesses, but like, who knew it was Japanese Americans? And it was actually World War II when the Japanese Americans were interned into, detention camps. And like, they couldn't take their equipment with them. They couldn't make cookies anymore at all.
Mhm.
And then the Chinese Americans were like, golden opportunity.
Mhm.
Um,
And then that it was also the soldiers coming back that helped
yes, yeah,
popularize it because they went through all of these ports in California as they were going back home, and
yeah.
they loved the fortune cookies.
Yes. So the returning soldiers often, were, all their bases were stationed on the West Coast or
Mhm.
yeah, on the West Coast coming back. And, they would go on leave and then the trendy food was Chinese food. So they would go and have Chinese food and they would get a free fortune cookie with their check. And so when they went back home all over the US, the South, the Midwest, the East Coast, if they didn't get that fortune cookie, they thought your Chinese food is not
Right.
authentic. You know what I mean? It was like, you
They were
know,
expecting it.
they were and then the odd thing was like in Los Angeles at the time, there was another competing Chinese manufacturer of fortune cookies. And the lore back then was that when people were waiting, like he made other stuff, like he was a very famous like noodle maker. But when people were waiting in line because he also owned a restaurant, so when people were waiting in line for the restaurant, he would give out the fortune cookies as like a snack. So it
Mhm.
wasn't always with the check,
Oh, right.
and so it's kind of so like like now we just take it for granted, but
Right.
like if you don't get your fortune cookie with your check, it's like, where's my fortune cookie?
And I
But
love that they had a mock
oh,
trials with Los Angeles and San Francisco over who could claim being the originators of fortune cookies. I mean, as being here in California, that was so fun for me to read about that.
and it was such like a Perry Mason moment or like a you know
Yes.
like a TV moment. I mean, it wasn't a real trial. It was sort of like a moot court. So like it wasn't, it was both sides took it seriously, but it wasn't like a legal ruling.
Right.
And so like, as the judge would, to both parties say they invented something, they would say like, okay, what's your evidence? Like you
Mhm.
must have, drawings or prototypes or this or that, like show me what you got. And so when the Los Angeles faction was like, we have the original kata, which is kind of like a flat, yeah, it's kind of like a mold. Like they would have
Mhm.
held it over a heat source, like a flame or like you know what I mean? And you kind
Mhm.
of pour batter. It's kind of like pancake batter. And then when you remove it, it gets crispy. So you know what I mean? So it makes
Right.
sense to have this thing. And they held it up like, here's our evidence. But then it had the initials of
Right.
the person who created it in San Francisco, MK, Makoto Hagiwara. And the interesting thing in our research was that I found the actual kata with the initials reversed and invert, like MK and KM. And I was like, wait, what?
Wow.
And then the illustrator was like, wait, like why are there two? And I was like, well, maybe like sometimes, like when you do it and then you press it, like it reverses.
Right.
So I was like, well, maybe it's that, or sometimes like you use your last name first, your first name last, like in Asian names, like Chinese and Japanese, we go more by our surname first.
Right. Right.
And so like it could be that, but it's interesting. There were two versions of it, and they had a version of it that was, I think theirs was in reverse, or maybe they had both. And the competing bakery, because I was able to visit both bakeries.
Mm.
The San Francisco one has closed down permanently, but the Los Angeles one is still hanging on, although the grandkids, people think that's the last generation. But I was there for like this past Mother's Day, and they have like big windows like set back in front of the bakery where you could put like, you could put a deep display of stuff. And I think back in the day they used to display it like,
Right.
here are here's our,
Our evidence, our proof.
our valued artifact. It wasn't there then though, because I looked at the display, but they had, all these old photographs of them back in the day. And I just thought like it's so fascinating, but it makes sense because the Japanese Americans had to leave all their stuff behind.
Right.
And sometimes it was like in warehouses, and it's kind of like that show where you have the storage unit, but then if you didn't pay, like Storage
Oh,
Wars,
yes. Yeah.
they
Right.
cut it open and they kind of auction it off, or it gets vandalized. So I mean, I think a lot of stuff did get vandalized and like just like went off into the wind. So it kind of makes sense, like it could have ended up in Los Angeles pretty easily during
Right.
during those like 4 years of war. But it was, yeah, it was just it was fascinating to research. It was not at all what I expected. And I leave it to the readers. Like the readers can decide for themselves, particularly where they think the fortune cookie was inspired from. Was it Chinese culture or Japanese culture? I think that's still like not definitive. In my
And
mind, I have a clear winner, but you know what I mean? I think jury's out, you know what I mean? So
I love the detail about when, if it is from Japanese culture, that there was the. So I'm going to look and see if I can find out who was that there was someone who was producing in Golden Gate Park, and someone suggested, for Americans, they probably like it sweeter. Why don't you add vanilla, add butter,
yeah.
and make it that originally it was inspired by something that was really savory. But that makes sense for Americans. Yes, we do like it sweeter. Add butter, add vanilla, and that would be more palatable to Americans. And it just makes so much sense. But it never occurred to me that it wouldn't have always been like that.
Right. So it was Makoto Hagiwara's like very close friend who owned a bakery. And he was like, hey, I can't make them by hand anymore. Like
Right.
selling out. My hand is scorched. Like I need
Right.
to produce it. Can you help me? And
Mhm.
he was the one who said, huh, like because he's running a bakery, like of all
Right.
kinds. He was like, sweetened miso is, it's more of a Japanese flavor. Like, why
Mhm.
don't we add, sugar and vanilla? And Makoto was like, yeah, sure, sounds good. You know what I mean? And then it started selling out. And so he was the one who had to invent that semi-automated machine because, like, even he and his crew in his bakery, they couldn't keep up.
Mhm.
And his bakery is interesting because I went to the site and it was being converted into a Shanghainese restaurant. I said, can I see the basement? Can I visit? Because, they were like literally in the middle of construction.
Right.
And the people working on it were clearly like part of the restaurant. Like it wasn't just like a random, construction crew. And I was like, can I see the basement? Because I'm writing this book, blah, blah, blah. And he was like, there's no basement. You know what I mean? Like San Francisco too, like they don't have basement. And then I
Right.
realized, you know what? They moved 3 times because it's like over 100 years old. And so there was another location that might have been that one, and then even one before that. So I was like, oh, it's so interesting. Because the first time I was like, wait, what? Like, I think
Yeah.
there was, you know, but it's just how, the history of it is, it's people and opportunities and, good times and bad times. And, And I remember too when this bakery said like, oh, we're going to shut down because it's a third generation, and they just said nobody wants to take it over because you got to get up like in the middle of the night, and it's like the longest day and the hardest work, and it's not like you're getting rich off of it. And now Los Angeles bakery too, which is more famous for like like mochi sweets, like very beautiful confectionery, Japanese confectionery, like you uh, like kind of like the pounded rice. And they're saying too, like as we get older, like I don't know, like my kids and my grandkids, no one seems interested.
Right.
I even see it in the Italian American bakery where I live in Newton, where it's at least two generations, and I see the second generation working there now that are like around my age, and when I go in they say like, I don't know if we're going to be around, like nobody wants to work. It's like 2 a.m. when we start.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's
So
just interesting because we think of it as such an institution, but some of it is already changing and already passing. And what I think is so interesting about this story is that it, like you said, when you set out to write the history of, just this treat that we all get when we go out for dinner, you don't think it's going to take you through all this history of the 20th century, World War II and after, and kind of the aftermath of it. You don't think that will be wrapped up in a story about a cookie.